Are you ready to dive deeper into Tolkien's world? If you've ever struggled to read the Silmarillion, I've got just the thing for you. I've created a free guide packed with my best tips to help you conquer this epic book. Whether you're a seasoned reader or tackling it for the first time, this guide will make your journey through the first age of Middle-earth more rewarding than ever. Head over to ringspodcast.com to download your free guide today. Your adventure deeper into Middle-earth starts now. Visit ringspodcast.com today for your free guide. In any on-screen adaptation of Tolkien, the storytellers face an impossible choice: what to cut out of Tolkien's works and leave into the on-screen story. Today we begin to explore a new chapter in J.R.R. Tolkien's Fellowship of the Ring, and if you've only seen the movies, then you've only seen about 3 lines from this chapter. And maybe that's okay for a film, but the unfortunate result is that you miss out on the depth and richness of characters like Strider and Frodo, that if you knew about, would make the story all that more compelling. I'm Aaron, your host and guide to Wandering Middle-earth, especially for first-time readers of Tolkien's works. Visit ringspodcast.com to find my free downloadable guides for reading the Silmarillion and other works by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, let's wander. Before we wander, let's take a moment to check the map and see where we've been, where we are, and where the road might lead next. It is the third age of Middle-earth. Frodo Baggins carries the One Ring. He has left the Shire on his way to Rivendell and is seeking refuge in a town of men called Bree. He is hunted by Black Riders, and he has yet to find his powerful friend Gandalf. While at Bree, he had a highly unfortunate accident where the ring slipped onto his finger, and he disappeared in front of the entire common room of the inn. And that leaves us to Chapter 10 of Book 1 in Fellowship of the Ring, called Strider. By way of synopsis, in this chapter, Strider tries to convince Frodo to allow him to join them. Barleyman Butterbur produces a letter to Frodo from Gandalf, and Merry has an encounter with a Black Rider. To download my free chapter guide for this chapter, visit ringspodcast.com/Strider. If you've only seen the films and this is your first read-through of the book, then let me highlight the one line from this chapter that you are most likely familiar with. Quote, "Though I cannot disappear, I've hunted many wild and wary things, and I can usually avoid being seen if I wish." Strider says something similar to this to Frodo after the ring accident at the Prancing Pony. He urges more caution, then Sam and the others burst into the room. There's a sprinkling of other lines and ideas from the chapter, but as far as movie scenes go, that's about it, in Peter Jackson's adaptation anyway. So I want to take a moment and look at the first 1/3 or so of this chapter and see what we can explore about Strider and Frodo. So far in the book, Strider has had some short conversations with Frodo, and he saw the disappearing accident. But Frodo, and we as readers, don't know all that much about him. But a close look at how Tolkien described Strider can reveal a few things. First, notice how often Strider is described, or even describes himself, as a rascal or a rogue. Frodo thinks he has, quote, fallen in with a rascal. Beyond that, the primary question of this chapter is posed by Frodo to Strider. Quote, "What do you know?" This is an interesting question because we've already seen many instances in which Strider seems to be able to read people's thoughts. When Barleyman first tells Frodo about Strider, Strider looks at them, quote, as if he had heard or guessed all that had been said. But that's not all. At one point he cuts off Frodo, being able to anticipate his question before Frodo asks it. He also knows where the hobbits are headed, though they never mentioned it in front of him. Quote, "You will never make it to Rivendell." The fact that he knows their plan isn't remarked on by the hobbits. Neither is this little revelation. Quote, "I need not repeat all that they said to old Bombadil." Apparently, Strider knows Tom Bombadil and can recognize him, which not many people can. But that is not all that Strider knows, as he first answers Frodo's question like this, quote, "Too much, too many dark things." What are these dark things that Strider knows? We'll get to that in a moment, but for now, what do we know about Strider? For one thing, he knows an awful lot more than he should. In fact, he knows many more things than what he seems to know on the surface. How does he know these things? We will see that in some cases he has private sources for his knowledge, but not in all things. I think what we see here is Strider is able to observe and pick up on small clues and make guesses that have an uncanny accuracy. It's almost as if he is a Sherlock Holmes type character in Middle-earth, though I see no evidence that Tolkien was inspired by those stories, just some similarities in the characters based solely on what we can observe about Strider right now. More to come on that, but as we learn more about Strider, we will find this uncanny ability to observe and make predictions will come in handy in many challenges that he has yet to encounter. Let's leave Strider for the moment and explore the styles of dialogue that we see in this portion of the chapter, and specifically, what that reveals to us about Frodo's character. When Strider is introducing himself to the hobbits, he says that he saw them talking with Bombadil, and then Frodo gave instructions for the hobbits to not use his real name, Baggins, but rather the traveling alias that Gandalf provided, Underhill. Strider finishes by saying, quote, "Maybe Mr. Baggins has an honest reason for leaving his name behind, but if so, I should advise him and his friends to be more careful." Frodo immediately picks up on the style of that line, and his next remark is a nearly exact stylistic parallel. Quote, "Mr. Strider may have an honest reason for spying and eavesdropping, but if so, I should advise him to explain it." I can see Tolkien and his own love for language chuckling to himself as he wrote that retort from Frodo, and speak through Strider's response. Quote, "Well answered," said Strider, laughing. Later on, Frodo will begin to believe Strider's story, because he is able to pick up on some subtle changes in Strider's speaking style. Now, I didn't personally observe enough Bree talk versus Strider talk to be able to observe this, but Frodo says, quote, "You began to talk to me like the Bree folk, but your voice has changed." Frodo has observed that Strider is not exactly what he seems to be on the surface. I mentioned that before, and we'll get into that more deeply in the next episode. But I want you to look at both of those instances together, along with others that we've seen before, because they reveal something about Frodo. Frodo matches Strider's syntax, and he picks up on his stylistic changes. Earlier, when Frodo was still in the Shire, he encountered Gildor and the Wood Elves. At that time, Frodo was able to elevate his speaking style with the elves, speaking phrases to them in their own language. The elves in turn respond with smiles and laughter, saying, quote, "Here is a jewel among hobbits." Frodo's ability to match his language to his audience shows just how wise Frodo really is. By using language familiar to his audience, he is able to build bridges, and even in the case of Strider, de-escalate tense situations. This ability to empathize through language will also be a major gift that Frodo can call upon, especially in future encounters where he will have to understand other characters that literally no one else can. Plus, if a lover of language, and make no mistake, Tolkien was a philologist, someone who studies the history and evolution of language, if a lover of language is going to write an epic adventure tale, then of course the main hero will be a master of language and speaking styles. I have one more insight to share with you, another dark thing that Strider knows. What is it, and how does he know it? We'll get to that right after this break. Are you ready to dive deeper into Tolkien's world? If you've ever struggled to read the Silmarillion, I've got just the thing for you. I've created a free guide packed with my best tips to help you conquer this epic book. Whether you're a seasoned reader or tackling it for the first time, this guide will make your journey through the first age of Middle-earth more rewarding than ever. Head over to ringspodcast.com to download your free guide today. Your adventure deeper into Middle-earth starts now. Visit ringspodcast.com today for your free guide. Frodo asks Strider what he knows, and Strider says he knows too many dark things. Later he gets more specific, quote, "I know their number. I know these riders." He continues to describe the Black Riders, even making an implicit threat that the riders will find the hobbits alone in the wild. As he says all this, his, quote, "face was drawn as if with pain, and his hands clenched the arms of his chair. Even the light in the room has gone dim." It's almost as if Strider has some personal experience with these riders. Has he encountered them before? Here is where we depart from the knowledge of this chapter and tap into the wider legendarium to see what we can learn. Also, spoiler alert if you've never read the book before. Actually, I'll tell you the only book spoiler here, so pause if you don't want to hear it. Strider will turn out to be Aragorn. I know, surprise, surprise, but there I said it. First, I'll say this. I know of no reference where Strider/Aragorn actually encountered the Black Riders before Frodo's journey with the ring. And yet, Strider still has a deep knowledge of these Black Riders. So let's make a few guesses as to how he does know about these riders. My first guess is that Strider is very familiar with the history of his own people. He would have to be, in order to know that he is Isildur's heir. A part of that history would be the fall of the North Kingdom, Arnor, which was the sister realm of the South Kingdom, which you know as Gondor. Arnor fell in large part due to its wars against Angmar, a kingdom of evil on the north end of the Misty Mountains that was ruled by the Witch King of Angmar, also known as the Chief of the Nazgûl or Black Riders. Arnor split into 3 lesser kingdoms, and the Witch King again pressed his advantage in the division and brought about the subjugation or dissolution of the 3 kingdoms, all but wiping out the line of Elendil and Isildur in the north, including Aragorn's ancestors. So when Strider/Aragorn thinks of the Black Riders, he likely has all that history in his mind. The downfall of ancient kingdoms, the hunting of his ancestors, and the power of the Witch King. For a more complete wandering into the North Kingdom and its ruin, listen to episode number 65 at ringspodcast.com/6565. But is there perhaps another reason for Aragorn's fear? This is a complete guess on my part, but perhaps Aragorn sees in the Nazgûl a potential of his own fate. The Nazgûl were once great kings of men, but they took rings from Sauron the Deceiver, and they are now wraiths forever under his rule. Does Aragorn fear that he might become like them, should he fail in the task of overcoming Sauron? Film Aragorn is certainly a lot more hesitant to take up that role, but not so book Aragorn. And yet, here stands Strider, in a room only feet away from the One Ring, with mere hobbits in his way. Will he take the ring? More on that in a future episode. For now, given all the dark things that Strider knows, he gives Frodo an offer, quote, "Take me as your guide or not." We will see by the end of this chapter if Frodo accepts the offer. To download my free chapter guide for this chapter, visit ringspodcast.com/Strider. There's a link in the show notes as well. And shout out to the Middle-earth Madness Student Club in Nazgûl in Massachusetts. I hope your second breakfast is just as tasty as the first, and that your wanderings through Middle-earth are filled with wonder and magic. If this answer brought a bit of light to your wandering, then help me light the beacons. Share this episode with a friend who needs a little Middle-earth magic. Together, we can guide more wanderers to the wisdom and wonder of Tolkien's world. Thank you for wandering Middle-earth with me today.